Hello, it's Chloe from Clobber Creations. Today I'm going to show you how to make a hair towel turban. So in front of me I've got the printed pattern. So I've turned this into a PDF pattern. It's based off the pattern I made when I made one for my nan for Christmas, and I thought other people might want to have a go at it. So there's an introduction page just advising you how to print it out. As with other PDF patterns, you've got to make sure it's on 100% or actual size. And there's also on page 2, which is on part of the pattern, there is a test square, so you can just print out page 2, check the scaling's correct and it measures up to 10 centimeters or 4 inches, and then you can go ahead and print the rest. I've also got the fabric I need, so I'm actually using a bath sheet. I find it quite hard to source toweling fabric and it's quite expensive. So for this project I've just got a bath sheet from IKEA, and it's roughly 100 centimeters by 150, but for this project you only need about, I'd say about 3/4 of a metre. You should be able to squeeze one out of that if you do manage to find some suitable fabric in a store. I've also got an offcut of elastic here, so this is a 1/4 inch, but I'd probably go for a slightly thinner than thicker elastic, just because you want to be able to loop it around your button okay. Which brings me on to that you need a button as well. And then I've got my matching threads and a bobbin to go with it. Right, so first things first, I'm going to construct the PDF pattern. Where's my guillotine? Have you seen it anywhere? We put it in the box. I remember that. So I've left quite a large margin on my PDF patterns just so that it definitely prints on different sized paper, so it should work for US and UK sized paper. What I normally do is I leave the first sheet and don't bother cutting off anything on that one, and then on the next one I cut the left hand side, and then when I get to the next row I do the left hand side and the top, as you don't need to cut off all the edges, and this should help you line it up. Okay, so now that I've cut out my template, I just thought I'd highlight a few points on the pattern. So I've marked 4 notches on this pattern. 2 of them have labels, the other 2 don't. The 2 that don't, that are around the long curve, these ones are just simply to help you line up the 2 pieces before you sew them up. The other 2, I've got one at the bottom and one at the top. There's one which is labelled button placement marker, so that's just to help give you a guide of where to place your button at the end, but obviously you can adjust that. And I've also got one at the top, and this one is an elastic placement marker, so that's where you're going to add your elastic. So it's worth adding those marks onto your fabric. But yeah, so now I'm going to cut out my fabric. Right, so I'm not sure you can see on the camera, but on my fabric I've actually used the stripy section on it. So with this, it's quite handy to find out where, you know, to get it lined up nice and evenly. But obviously there is also a grain line printed on there to help you. So once you've cut out your fabric pieces, it's time to add the elastic. So for this, you need to grab one of the pieces and you need to have it right side out. So I'm just going to take the bottom layer, as that one's right side up already. So the first thing you need to do, if you haven't done already, is to cut your piece of elastic to 8 centimeters long. Right, so you need to fold your elastic piece in half, like so, and then you need to get it to meet with the raw edges on your fabric piece. So you're putting it on the right side and you're placing it where your marker is. And I'm just going to add a pin to position that for now. So for this, I've just used the sewing machine to tack it in place, but you could just hand stitch it as well. Now we've got this bit of elastic tacked in place, I'm now going to place the other pattern piece on top of it. And now I'm going to pin, or in my case I'll probably use some quilting clips, and then I'm going to stitch all the way around this long curved back edge, which will form the back of the hair towel turban. If you do have an overlocker, what you could do instead, when you cut it out, you could half the seam allowance. So I've put ½ inch on this, which is 1.2 centimeters, but you could reduce that and just use your overlocker and go around the edge. Otherwise you could leave it how it is and allow your overlocker to trim it off. So if you do have an overlocker, you could just overlock at this stage. If you don't, you'll need to go onto the sewing machine, stitch through, and then you'll need to neaten the raw edges after. Alternatively, if you do have an overlocker still, by all means you can, as it's quite a curved edge, you're more than welcome to just use your sewing machine to stitch the original seam allowance to start with, and then you could overlock the ends after, which is what I'm going to do in this case. One thing to note if you are overlocking and you're going to trim these seam allowances is to just make your markings for the buttonhole a bit clearer. This will just help for aligning, because you may end up chopping off the bit where you did mark it. So I'm just going to extend mine down a bit so that I can see it after I've overlocked. Once you've neatened off those seams, I would recommend giving that seam a little bit of a press just so it lies a bit flatter. So my overlocking, I've just overlocked the two layers together, but I'm just going to ensure that it presses to one side before I neaten those front raw edges. For the next step, you need to finish off the front raw edges before you neaten up this seam. So I'm going to use an overlocker because I have one. If you don't have one, if you just use a zigzag stitch just to prevent a bit of fraying, and that's what you need to do next. Now that you've neatened up the raw edges, you will need to press under a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or 1.2 centimeters, all of the way around, and then you'll need to stitch that fairly close to the raw edge, but just be careful of where your elastic is hanging out. Depending how thick elastic you used, it might go lower down than you expect, so you might just want to adjust where your stitching line is. Okay, so your hair turban is almost complete. The final step is adding the button to this end. So you should still have a marker if you transferred it a bit higher up. So I'm going to use that to roughly gauge where I want to put the button. I've actually changed my mind on buttons while I've been making this, so I've now decided to use a slightly bigger button. Now for the button, you want to make sure it's tied on really secure, just because it's going to be holding back that bit of elastic which might be quite taut. So just bear that in mind. So I've doubled mine over and tied a knot. It's also handy to give it a little bit of wiggle room as well, so I'm just going to find something I can put in the back. Okay, so I've got a walking foot gauge. I'm just going to use the round bit. Okay, so now you have your button in place. Right, let's see if this actually fits my head. Hello again, so here is the final hair towel turban. So I'll just give you a quick whirl around so you can see it from different angles. So from the back you can see that I've got the button down there. As I've got quite a big head, it might have been better if I'd positioned it slightly up, so that would be my main recommendation. Although I have put where the button could be placed on the pattern, I'd recommend, you know, trial and error, seeing, you know, whoever you're making it for, if you're making it for yourself. If you've got a smaller head, it's probably fine lower down there, but if you've got a bigger head like myself, you might want it a little bit higher up. You could also extend the elastic a bit, although that will wear out in time, so it will become a bit looser and more flexible. So this bit of elastic I've got there is quite tight. But if you use something like hat elastic, it will probably be have a bit more give than this one. So although I do feel the button could be a bit higher up for me, I think when the elastic wears in a bit, it won't be a problem for me anymore. So I'm quite happy with the fit. I have put this on with dry hair, so it was a bit challenging to put on. But if you've got wetter hair, I'm sure it would be a lot easier to put your hair turban on. Another thing to note is I've got quite long hair, so what I do when I put a towel turban on is I just fold the excess in. So if you got hair that's longer than the length of this, that's what I'd recommend doing. Okay, that's all I've really got to say on it. So yeah, if you do want to make this yourself, just click on the link below and you should be able to download the PDF that I've created for this. Thanks for watching. Bye.